She was just a girl when her water broke on the cold linoleum floor of a run-down apartment complex in Detroit. No nurse, no midwife, no mother or sister, just her and the night. Her cries echoed through the thin walls like broken prayers. Not one door opened. A shadow moved behind a window curtain. Someone muttered, "Another one again." The landlord's wife hissed from her balcony, "Useless girl who couldn't keep her legs closed." Her name was Danielle, barely 17. Her body shook with pain. Her breath was short. She had no strength left, only fear and instinct. She leaned against a wall, gritting her teeth. Blood pooled beneath her. She bit into her palm to stop herself from screaming too loudly. No one came. She gave birth there, alone, trembling and shaking, to a baby girl wrapped in blood and silence. Her arms shook as she held the child. The baby didn't cry immediately. For a moment, Danielle thought she had died. Then a tiny, sharp wail pierced the air. She cried too. She used her old blanket to clean the child and held her close to her chest. "You will live," she whispered. "Even if I die, you will live." She named her daughter Hope, not because she had hope, but because she wanted her to become everything she was not. Danielle had no one. Her mother had died 2 years earlier. Her aunt, Brenda, had beaten her when she found out she was pregnant. The boy, Derek, vanished before her belly began to show. He never looked back. Neighbors ignored her. The pain, the tears, the blood, they acted like it was normal, like her suffering didn't deserve a second glance. By dawn, Danielle had cut the baby's cord with a razor blade and wrapped her tightly. She didn't sleep that night. She just watched her daughter breathe. The next morning, someone stepped over the blood-stained floor like it was dirt. A child pointed at her, and his mother dragged him away quickly. Danielle remained where she was, sore, hungry, bleeding, but strong. That was the day she promised herself one thing: "They will never give us anything, so I will take it for you." The apartment complex was alive with whispers. Danielle had become a walking warning sign. Whenever she passed, the landlord's wife would hiss and say loudly, "Look at her, carrying pregnancy like an animal. No shame." Children giggled behind her back. Some adults looked away. Others stared too long. Nobody offered help. Danielle didn't cry where people could see. She waited until the night came and Hope had fallen asleep, then let the tears soak her blanket. She started selling fried potatoes from a food cart near the gas station, the baby tied to her back with a faded cloth. She used a small propane stove under an umbrella patched with tape. She borrowed the cart and bought potatoes on credit. Every coin counted, every raindrop stung. People didn't come for the food at first. They came to stare, to judge. Some offered coins just to laugh. Others asked for her name and then never came back. It didn't matter. She woke up early to fetch water, bathe Hope, and clean her cart. She cooked with speed and precision. Sometimes she didn't eat. The baby did. When Hope cried from hunger, Danielle would chew soft potato, cool it with her breath, and feed her with her fingers. She did it quietly, ashamed but determined. One evening, she overheard a woman say, "That one has no future. Her child will end up useless too." That night, Danielle couldn't sleep. She held her baby tight and whispered, "You won't fail. You will shine." And so she worked harder, started frying chicken when she could afford it. She moved her cart closer to a busy road. She kept to herself. She timed her movements to avoid gossip. Shame was her shadow, but she refused to let it lead her. Her body changed, slimmer, stronger. She moved with the rhythm of survival. And every night, she whispered the same thing to Hope. "One day you will wear shoes I never wore. You will eat things I only smelled." One dry, windy afternoon, Danielle returned from getting water and found her cart on fire. The wood, the borrowed umbrella, even the small cash box, all swallowed by flames. A little boy pointed and said, "Lady, fire!" But it was too late. Neighbors stood around, hands on hips, mouths full of opinions. "It's a curse," one woman said. "She brought it on herself," another added. Nobody offered help. No one brought water. Danielle stood there, frozen, watching the last thing she owned turn to smoke. She knelt in the dirt, grabbed a handful of ash, and cried. Hope tugged her hoodie, confused and scared. "Mommy, don't cry," she whispered. "I'm here." That voice, small, sweet, innocent, pulled Danielle back. She wiped her tears, looked around, and stood up. "I will start again," she said, more to herself than anyone. She walked to the supermarket lot that evening and began asking, "Does anyone need help?" Someone handed her a broom. Another pointed at a dirty alley. She didn't complain. She swept, she fetched water, she scrubbed. By the end of the day, her fingers ached, her clothes were filthy, and her back hurt. But she earned coins, just enough to buy a pack of instant noodles and a bottle of water. She cooked that night and fed Hope. They both ate in silence. Danielle smiled for the first time that day. Even with nothing, she had hope. She slept beside her daughter, whispering, "Ashes don't kill a seed. I will rise." The next morning, she returned to the lot with her broom. People looked at her like a stubborn stain. She didn't care. Each sweep brought her closer to food. Each scrape of the pavement meant coins. She noticed a man watching her, tall, quiet, often sitting near a fruit truck. At first, she ignored him. Then, one evening, he left a bottle of water beside her broom. No words, just a nod. Another time, he dropped a small bag of rice beside Hope, who was asleep on sacks. Danielle was suspicious. But hunger doesn't reject help. She began to notice him more. He never smiled, but he always looked at Hope gently. One evening, she approached him. "Why are you helping me?" He replied softly, "Because I see you." His name was Elijah, a man of few words. Danielle didn't ask questions. He didn't offer pity, just help. And somehow, that made it easier to accept. She began earning more. She started buying used clothes and reselling. Little by little, her hands built a new life. At night, she would pray for Elijah, the man who didn't laugh or judge. And every morning, she repeated the same prayer to Hope. "You will be more than me, I promise." One stormy night, Hope wouldn't stop coughing. Her small body burned with fever. Danielle touched her forehead. It was too hot. She wrapped her in 2 old blankets and stepped into the rain. She ran from one apartment door to another, barefoot. First door, silence. Second, "Go away." Third, the lights turned off the moment she knocked. Fourth, a man peered out, saw her drenched and holding the baby, and shut the door. She stood in the middle of the street, soaked and trembling. Rain poured over her. Lightning flashed. Thunder rumbled. She sank beside a storm drain and held Hope close. She began to sing. It was the lullaby her mother used to sing, soft, low, trembling. Her tears mixed with the rain. She didn't sleep. She kept watching her daughter's chest rise and fall. At dawn, Hope opened her eyes and gave a weak smile. Danielle laughed and cried at the same time. That morning she whispered, "They may never give us anything, but I will take it for you." The fever passed, but Danielle had no money left. She walked to the strip mall and asked for cleaning jobs again. One woman allowed her to mop her salon in exchange for leftover rice. Bit by bit, she returned to work. She cleaned, fetched water, helped old vendors sort their shelves. Hope would sleep on blankets behind counters. Elijah would sometimes pass by, drop water, food, or cash, always silent, always watching. One day, Elijah handed her a worn notebook. For her, he said. Hope used it to write letters, shapes, and names. She called it her treasure. Each week brought a small victory. Danielle stopped thinking about her past. She focused only on what was ahead. She was building something, slowly, painfully, but with love. Hope continued to shine in school. She always answered first. She read faster, wrote longer. Her teacher noticed, but so did her classmates. One day, a girl named Jasmine accused her of stealing a phone. The phone was found in Hope's locker. Danielle was called to the school. Hope cried, "I didn't take it, Mommy." Danielle believed her, but the school had already written a suspension letter. Back at home, Danielle held her daughter's hand. "People will lie against you, but don't let it take your light." Hope didn't speak for days. Then, one night, she picked up a pen and began writing. She filled her notebook with words. A few months later, the school announced a speech competition. Students were told to pick any topic. Hope chose shame. She stood before the crowd and spoke. "Shame tried to bury my mother, but she stood tall. She fed me with strength. She made hunger taste like hope." She spoke of love, courage, and pain, not to gain pity, but to honor her mother. When she finished, the hall was silent. Then applause. Then a standing ovation. She won, not just the trophy, but a scholarship to a top prep school in Washington, D.C. Her principal called Danielle to inform her. Danielle dropped her mop bucket and screamed with joy. In the shadows, Elijah smiled and turned away. Leaving Detroit wasn't easy. Danielle packed Hope's clothes with trembling hands. The scholarship covered everything, even transportation. A black SUV arrived to take Hope. It was the first time Danielle had seen such a car up close. She held Hope's hand tightly. At the school gate in D.C., the driver said, "You can go now." Danielle shook her head. "I'll wait until she gets inside." The school looked like a palace. Clean walls, confident children. Hope's hands shook. "I'm scared, Mommy." Danielle knelt and hugged her. "I'm scared too, but we came this far by faith. You will be fine." She watched her daughter disappear through the doors. Then she turned, heart full. That night, Elijah called. "She will shine," he said. Danielle replied, "Thank you." Washington, D.C. was loud, fast, and strange. The roads buzzed with cars. The children spoke fluent English, crisp and polished. Hope felt out of place. Her shoes were worn out. Her accent was different. When she said, "fixin' to eat," instead of "going to eat," the other students giggled. They whispered when she passed. Some ignored her completely. She cried once in the dorm room but wiped her face quickly. "I came here to rise," she reminded herself. Hope began to study harder than ever. She borrowed textbooks. She stayed after class to ask questions. She practiced pronunciation at night. One day she topped the class in algebra. Another day she recited a poem perfectly. Her teachers took notice. Meanwhile, back in Detroit, Danielle kept praying. Elijah sent money occasionally, always through strangers, always without his name. Danielle would kneel and say, "Bless whoever you are, bless you beyond measure." The English teacher gave an assignment. Write an essay about someone who shaped your life. Many students wrote about celebrities or siblings. Hope wrote about her mother. She titled the piece, "The Woman They Called Useless." She described how Danielle raised her alone, how she mopped floors in strip malls, skipped meals so her daughter could eat, cried in the dark, and smiled in public, how she never stopped believing in her daughter. The essay moved her teacher to tears. It was submitted to a youth magazine, then picked up by a national newspaper. Danielle read her name in print for the first time. She couldn't believe it. She carried the paper to Elijah's old apartment, but he had moved. No one knew where. Hope's essay made her famous in school. She was no longer the girl from the projects. She became student council president. She won a national debate. She appeared on a youth TV program, and when asked who inspired her, she replied, "My mother, Danielle." Back in Detroit, people who once mocked now said, "That's Danielle's daughter." Elijah read about her in the newspaper and smiled. He never revealed himself. He just continued to watch from afar. One evening, a man in a suit stepped out of a luxury car and knocked on Danielle's door. "My name is Dr. Richards," he said. "I read your daughter's essay. I want to sponsor her education abroad." Danielle was speechless. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "She is rare. She is worth it." After he left, Danielle wept. "God, thank you. Whoever is behind this, bless them forever." Elijah stood in the shadows, unseen but smiling. The documents came quickly. Passport, visa, scholarship, all handled. Hope was going to study in London. Danielle hugged her daughter tightly the night before the flight. "Go and conquer, my child. Make the world hear your voice." At the airport, Hope turned back one last time. Danielle waved with trembling fingers. She didn't cry, not until the plane disappeared into the clouds. Back home, Danielle returned to her cleaning jobs. Life wasn't easy, but she now walked with pride. Every evening, she waited for Hope's calls. Every month, Hope sent small gifts, books, a new coat, a phone card. Every time, Danielle whispered, "Thank you, God." Elijah had stayed away for years, not because he didn't care, but because he didn't want to distract Danielle or bring questions she wasn't ready to answer. Yet as Hope's story spread across newspapers and television, Elijah couldn't hold back anymore. He returned quietly to Detroit and asked about Danielle. Everyone had the same response. "She's the mother of that girl on TV. She walks with pride now." One evening, Danielle was returning from the store when she saw a familiar figure waiting by her door. Her heart stopped. "Elijah?" she whispered. He turned. "It's me." For a moment, silence filled the space between them, then tears welled in her eyes. She didn't say anything. She simply opened her door and stepped aside. They sat together for hours. She told him everything, how Hope had grown, how she feared for her every day but never let it show. Elijah listened, quietly and with warmth. "I never stopped praying for you both," he said. That night, for the first time in a long while, Danielle smiled in the presence of a man, not out of fear or pretense, but peace. Unknown to Danielle, Elijah had been helping behind the scenes for years. It was he who contacted Dr. Richards. It was he who arranged the scholarship. He had stayed hidden, not wanting to take credit. One afternoon, Danielle mentioned the doctor again. That man changed Hope's life. Elijah simply nodded. Good men still exist. She looked at him for a long moment. "You remind me of him." He chuckled. "Maybe I know him." They both laughed, but Danielle didn't press further. Elijah began visiting more frequently. He helped her repair her leaking roof. He brought groceries. He even fixed the wobbly kitchen chair she had refused to throw out. Neighbors began to talk again, this time with curiosity rather than contempt. But Danielle didn't mind. Elijah made her feel seen, not just as a mother, not just as a woman who had suffered, but as someone worthy of joy. It was a Sunday morning. The neighborhood was quiet. Danielle was sweeping her front porch when Elijah walked up to her, holding a small velvet box. "I've watched you carry life with dignity. I've watched your daughter rise like the sun. Let me stand by you." "Not in secret anymore." Danielle froze. Elijah opened the box. A silver ring sparkled inside. I'm not just proposing love. I'm proposing peace, rest, joy. Let me be the man who helps you rest. Tears filled her eyes. I don't deserve this, she whispered. He stepped closer. You deserve more than this, Danielle. You deserve the world. She didn't answer immediately, but later that evening, she sat beside him and held his hand. No words, just peace. The neighbors who once whispered insults now whispered prayers. As wedding preparations began, a shadow returned from the past. Eric, the man who had abandoned Danielle, showed up at her door. He looked older, leaner, more desperate. I want to see my daughter, he said. Danielle stood in silence. Eric knelt. Please, I was young, I was foolish, but I want to make things right. Hope had just returned from London for the wedding. She stepped outside and faced him. You're the one who left her in pain? She asked. He nodded. Yes, but I want to make it right. I want to marry her now. I want to be part of her life. Hope looked him straight in the eyes. You want to marry my mother, now that she's no longer useless? You're too late. Danielle stood beside her daughter. You left us in the dark. Don't walk in now that we've found light. Eric begged. But their hearts had healed without him. The wedding day came. Danielle wore a sky-blue dress, her smile brighter than the morning sun. Hope stood beside her, holding her hand like a proud daughter. Elijah wore a crisp, white suit. He didn't look like the quiet helper from the past. He looked like the man who had always believed in them. People came from near and far, some out of surprise, others out of admiration. The same neighborhood where Danielle once gave birth alone now echoed with music, laughter, and love. During the vows, Elijah turned to Danielle. I fell in love with your strength, your courage, and the fire in your eyes. Danielle whispered, You saw me when no one else did. They were joined as husband and wife under the open sky. No shame, no fear, just love. But Hope's journey was just beginning, and so was Danielle's next chapter, not of pain but of purpose. The days after the wedding felt like a soft dream. Danielle, once the girl mocked for carrying a baby alone, now walked through the neighborhood with quiet joy. Elijah treated her like royalty. He never raised his voice. He never reminded her of the past. He simply gave her peace. They built a new home on the edge of Southfield, a quiet suburb near Detroit. It wasn't a mansion, but it was filled with laughter, gospel music, and the smell of homemade cornbread and okra soup. Danielle often stood by the window and whispered, Thank you, Lord. Thank you for remembering me. Hope resumed her studies in London. She now had access to opportunities she only dreamt about as a child. Still, she never missed a Sunday call. Every week, her voice filled the house. Mom, I submitted my first research paper today. Mom, guess who invited me to speak at their youth summit? Danielle would sit beside Elijah and smile. Our girl is soaring, she'd say. And she was. Inspired by her story, Hope launched a non-profit organization focused on educating girls in underserved communities. She called it the Danielle Foundation. She began visiting small towns and inner-city schools, distributing supplies, paying tuition, and mentoring young girls. Word spread quickly. News channels featured her. Podcasters called her a rising voice. When asked, "What drives you?" She always said, "My mother." Danielle couldn't believe it. Her name, once whispered in judgment, was now spoken with reverence. Children chanted it during outreach rallies. Struggling mothers thanked her in prayers. Elijah helped too, quietly, with the same grace. He leveraged his old business contacts to support the foundation. "I'm not doing this for the headlines," he'd say. "I believe in your legacy." Danielle often stayed up late sewing care packages or organizing food boxes for the next outreach. Purpose had finally come home to her. Then one morning, Danielle received a letter stamped with the seal of the White House. Her hands trembled. It was an official invitation. The President of the United States wanted to meet Hope and her mother. Danielle nearly dropped the letter. "Me? The White House?" Hope called within minutes, her voice beaming. "Mom, they want to honor the foundation. We're going to Washington together." Elijah clapped with joy. "This is just the beginning." On the day of the ceremony, Danielle wore her finest church dress, a pale blue wraparound with gold trimmings. Her hair was braided neatly. She walked into the East Room of the White House, not as a woman forgotten, not as a single mom who once wept in the dark, but as a woman of honor. During the event, the president said, "Behind every remarkable child is a parent who refused to give up." Danielle wiped her eyes and whispered, "It was never easy, but it was worth it." Shortly afterward, a major international news outlet reached out. They wanted to feature Hope and her mother in a global documentary. The interview aired worldwide. Hope sat in front of the camera and told her story from the beginning: the food stand, the cold nights, the eviction notice, the hunger, the shame. But she didn't cry. She spoke with fire. "My mother didn't just raise me, she carried me, with faith, with grit, with everything she had left. She taught me that even if the world calls you nothing, you can still rise." Clips of Detroit played, photos of Danielle selling snacks on street corners, videos of Hope mentoring young girls in school gyms and church halls. Donations poured in from across the world. The foundation grew. More girls were educated. Schools were equipped. Forgotten communities began to believe again. Back home, Danielle sat before the TV, hands over her mouth. "Lord, you turned my tears into testimonies." Months passed. The house in Southfield became a beacon. Danielle no longer worked market stalls. Instead, she trained women in life skills: candle making, catering, natural hair care. She ended every session with the same line: "If they call you nothing, build something they can never ignore." That December, Hope returned home with a doctorate degree. The community threw a surprise celebration. Gospel choirs, African drums, soul food, laughter, everything came alive. At the center was Danielle, dressed in gold lace, her hands lifted in praise. Then, in front of the entire crowd, Hope took the microphone. "My name is Dr. Hope Williams, but today I speak as the daughter of Danielle Johnson. Every book I've written, every child I've helped, every stage I've stood on, I carried her with me." She knelt before her mother. "Thank you for never giving up on me or yourself." The crowd wept. Even the sky seemed to pause. And in that moment, the woman once mocked became the mother of a movement. One evening after the celebration, Danielle and Elijah sat quietly under the old oak tree behind their new home. The moon was bright. The stars looked like blessings scattered in the sky. Elijah cleared his throat. "There's something I've never told you." Danielle turned to him. "What is it?" He looked into her eyes, gently took her hand, and said, "I didn't come to this neighborhood by accident. I came from Australia." Her eyes widened. "Australia?" He nodded. "I own businesses there. Real estate, logistics, and education. Years ago, I made a decision to return to the US for one reason: to find a woman with a pure heart, a woman who understood struggle, sacrifice, and strength. Then, I saw you." Danielle's lips trembled. "It was me who reached out to Dr. Richards. It was me who sent those envelopes. I didn't want to pressure you. I wanted you to accept me for who I am, not what I have." Tears rolled down Danielle's cheeks. "You did all this silently." Elijah smiled. "Because love doesn't need noise, it just needs truth." The days that followed were filled with planning. Elijah began working on travel documents for Danielle and Hope. He wanted to take both of them to Australia, not to change who they were, but to broaden their journey. Hope, now a global speaker and advocate for girls' education, had been invited to speak at the United Nations in New York, but first they would stop in Sydney. Danielle wasn't sure at first. "I've never flown overseas," she said, laughing nervously. Elijah squeezed her hand. "You've handled far more than that. You can do this." Before leaving, they set up a strong leadership team to manage the Danielle Foundation back home. Local educators and volunteers were well prepared. Danielle addressed them before departure. "This foundation is not about me. It's about every girl who was ever told she couldn't. Promise me it won't stop." The plane descended into Sydney under a vast, clear sky. Danielle looked out the window and whispered, "This is real." Elijah's house was not just a home. It was a spacious estate. Manicured gardens, light-filled rooms, quiet elegance. The air smelled of new beginnings. Hope was given a private study office. Danielle had her own reading nook and a small garden she could call hers. She walked through every room, touching the walls softly. Elijah hugged her. "Welcome home." She smiled, tears in her eyes. "From a food cart to a home like this, look at how God moves." Soon, Danielle began sending steady support back to Detroit. Funds for single mothers, school uniforms, food packages for families. Her impact grew even while she lived abroad. She often reminded the Foundation's team back home, "Don't wait for a fortune. Start with love." Hope's speech at the UN shook the world. Standing before diplomats and leaders, she delivered from silence to significance, the story of her mother's bravery, from cold floors to food stands, from unseen suffering to global impact. The room exploded with applause. Afterwards, NGOs reached out. Scholarships were donated in Danielle's name. Schools were named after her. She traveled to Kenya, Ghana, and South Africa as Mama Danielle. Danielle stayed grounded. Each time she heard news of their work, she said quietly, "Hope, you've become more than I ever prayed for." Elijah would smile and reply, "And you, Danielle, are more than anyone expected." Years later, Danielle stood on a balcony overlooking Sydney's quiet street, now with graceful silver in her hair and joy in her heart. Children from nearby schools greeted her every morning. Hope had become a professor, philanthropist, and best-selling author. One of her most acclaimed books was Raised by Fire. The dedication read, "To my mother, the woman the world once called worthless." Back in Detroit, the Danielle Foundation continued to thrive. Every year, new graduates walked across stages. Many called her Mama Danielle, though they had never met her. Danielle still mentored women via online summits from her Sydney home, sharing lessons of resilience, faith, and grace. She once said in a global webcast, "What matters is not where you begin, but that you refuse to give up." and she never stopped. From a cracked linoleum floor in Detroit to a legacy spanning continents, Danielle's journey proved that truth and love can rewrite any story, and that one woman's courage can ripple through generations. She and Elijah raised both sons and daughters, symbols of their hope, love, and purpose. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't subscribed, please click on that subscribe button now. Turn on the notifications so whenever I post more interesting stories, you'll be the first to get them. I really appreciate you. I do not take your support for granted. See you in my next video. Bye.